You know, the beauty of this whole devotional approach to Bible study is probably expressed to me by me. The other day I said something that was accidentally really, really, really smart. And I think I've hinted at it before. The devotional approach to Bible study isn't so much a search for what the Bible has to say. It is a search for what the Bible has to say to me personally. It's a study of page. I'm learning more about page by approaching my Bible study in a devotional manner, because I always ask every chapter, every passage, this question: what is there about me that I need to know? And what is there about God that I need to know? So the devotional application is about applying the body of my text to my life. And I had an experience the other day that was really kind of interesting, and it shows the power of this devotional Bible study. I was talking to our worship pastor, Kerry Amos. Wonderful guy. And I was just telling him, just having a little chat about how much I love the church and everything. And I was talking to him about where I'm at in my devotionals. I'm studying the life of David. And I'm talking about David and Absalom, the conflict there. And some words came out of me that were really revelatory. And it was totally by accident. It's one of those things where, again, I'm saying, I hope somebody was paying attention and took notes, because that was really good. And I was talking about David and Absalom. And I said something to the effect that I want to say that I'm like David, a man after God's own heart. But the truth is, I'm more like Absalom. Somebody who talks the talk, looks good doing it, but really isn't equipped to be king. And he started to shut me down. I said, no. I said, no. Listen carefully. My whole life I pursued the big paycheck. And I get into the satellite communications company, and I pursued the big paycheck. I finally got to the point where I pursued my role as a manager of my engineering group, because that was where the big paycheck was. And I talked the talk. I campaigned for it. They hired me. They promoted me. I became manager, and I was fired within a year. And the reason is that I looked good. I talked the right talk to become manager, but in actuality, I was very ineffectual as a manager. When it came right down to it, I could not carry out what I said I would. My dad had a saying. He'd say, don't let your mouth write a check that your butt can't cash. That was me. And in so many respects, I'm more like Absalom than I am like David. And that takes me back to the story of Absalom and David, and to find out more about Absalom and David and apply it to my life. I'm beginning to see that supposedly off-the-cuff comment has a lot of truth. So many times in my life, I have not pursued God, but I pursued my own understanding of a situation. I pursued that management position. For years, I pursued a position within the church. For years, I thought I was supposed to be a worship pastor, or maybe a pastor or a preacher teacher. And I pursued these things. And many times, I was able to convince whatever pastor I was working with that indeed that is what God had for me, when in truth, God had not spoken that to me. God had not spoken that to me. It was me talking the talk. And the truth is, if I had ever achieved a position as a pastor, I would have been a very poor pastor. I see that now. It's because I'm more like Absalom than I am like David in many regards. Now, in the past few years, that's changed. Because I finally come to the point of realization of where I am and what I'm supposed to be doing as a child of God. And I'm doing it. And I'm comfortable. I'm relaxed. I'm finally settled down. 67 years old. It's about time to settle down, right? And I'm no longer wearing the mantle of Absalom. David was a warrior king. He was effective because that was what God's plan for him was. Absalom, in the short period he was king, was terrible. And he would have been an even worse king had he continued on. Because that isn't what God had for him. I don't know what God had for him. We'll never find out. But for me, being able to shed the mantle of Absalom and not be someone who is taking charge of his own life and trying his best to look good and sound good, that has been the biggest relief in my life. And that's the power of devotional Bible study. God reveals all that about me to me. It's revelatory and it's freeing. I believe I've totally, completely shed the mantle of Absalom. But for years, that's what I wore. So that was a humbling moment with my worship pastor. And yet, it's a freeing moment because I'm no longer there. That's why devotional Bible study means so much to me. Now, having said that, why don't we get started on chapter 17 and see the next chapter? We're almost done. We're in part 4 of the Absalom conspiracy, and we're almost finishing this story. Welcome to another episode of Coffee, the Bible, and Paige. I am Paige, your caffeine-imbued host. And they all said, with joy and rejoicing, in the beginning, coffee. And lo, it was very good. All right, let's give you a quick summary. Absalom has gotten himself proclaimed king. He's moved into Jerusalem. David has left Jerusalem and has escaped Absalom's clutches. David's on the run. And now Absalom is going to be making his plans to go out and kill David because that's what he has to do. He has to get David off the map entirely. And so he has to make plans to kill his father. And David knows the odds are he's going to have to kill his son. Absalom has Ahithophel, who was in David's inner circle, now in his inner circle. And Ahithophel has real anger against David and is no longer having to pretend. And we're going to see that in today's chapter. Absalom also has Hushai, who was also one of David's counselors. Now, this is Absalom's biggest faux pas as a king of Israel. He is a poor judge of character. He has a valuable asset in Ahithophel because Ahithophel has a motivation to get rid of David because of what David did to his granddaughter, Bathsheba. That's right, Ahithophel was Bathsheba's grandfather. And I'm going to tell you something. I have a granddaughter. If someone were to hurt my granddaughter, I would be very angry myself. I understand that. So Absalom has a very valuable asset in Ahithophel because he was in David's inner circle. He can get insight into how David operates and how David would act. And that would be valuable intel for Absalom. But Hushai, on the other hand, when he shows up, there's no emotional commitment against David in him. He just, when he's asked, he says, well, you know what? I served your father. I'll serve you. You're the king. I serve the king, whoever he is. And there's no antipathy or anger or resentment towards David there. In fact, it's a very neutral response. And Absalom makes a mistake of emotionally, at least, elevating Hushai to the same level as Ahithophel as far as counsel goes. And we're going to see that today. So let's look at this. Chapter 17. Ahithophel said to Absalom, I would choose. Now, by the way, he's been requested to give counsel what should happen next. Ahithophel said to Absalom, I would choose 12,000 men, and I would set out tonight in pursuit of David. I would attack him while he is weary and weak. I would strike him with terror, and then all the people with him will flee. I would strike down only the king and bring all the people back to you. The death of the man you seek will mean the return of all. All the people will be unharmed. And the plan seemed good to Absalom and to all the elders of Israel. All right, this is great advice, because hit the enemy before he has a chance to entrench himself and prepare their own defense. Get after him now while he's on the run. Catch him while he's running. Don't give him a chance to get to a place where he can either get into a fortified city or into a defensible position in the wilderness. Go after him now. Get 12,000 men and nail him. That was great advice, because Ahithophel knows how David operates. And he knows that David is on the run. He's in the wilderness. He doesn't have supplies. He just left all of a sudden. He's got his family with him. This would be the ideal time to get him. Incredible advice. But Absalom says, summon also Hushai the Archite, so we can hear what he has to say as well. When Hushai came to him, Absalom said, Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? If not, give us your opinion. And here is Hushai's response to Absalom. The advice that Ahithophel has given is not good this time. You know your father and his men. They are fighters, and as fierce as a wild bear robbed of her cubs. Besides, your father is an experienced fighter. He will not spend the night with the troops. Even now, he's hidden in a cave or some other place. If he should attack your troops first, whoever hears about it will say, there's been a slaughter among the troops who follow Absalom. Then even the bravest soldier, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt with fear, for all Israel knows that your father is a fighter, and that those with him are brave. He's reminding Absalom, in a very underhanded way, your father is a warrior, you're not. Your father won't go down without a fight. 12,000 men will not be enough to defeat the skilled warriors he has with him. And even now, he's preparing for you. That's what he's telling him. And what he's really doing is offering a delaying ruse here to give David time to go get set. He says, don't go after him right now, because he will be an incredibly difficult foe in the battlefield. And everything he says about David is true. It isn't a lie. When David was 13 years old, he destroyed, he killed Goliath. And he rose in the ranks to become Saul's greatest general. You remember people used to say Saul has killed his thousands and David has killed his tens of thousands? David is an incredibly experienced, never defeated warrior king. Absalom, you're not a warrior king. You need to do something else. And what is that something else? Well, this was his advice. So I advise you, let all Israel from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sands of the seashore, be gathered to you, with yourself leading them into battle. Oh, he's playing to Absalom's weakness. You lead them to battle. You're the king. Get all these men. Get this huge army. You lead them into battle. And then we will attack him wherever he may be found. We'll fall on him as dew settles on the ground. Neither he or any of his men will be left alive. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we will drag it down to the valley until not so much a pebble is left. Now, this is good advice as well. Whereas Ahithophel said, let's hit him now, quick, before he has time to settle down and entrench himself. This advice says, we don't care where he settles down. We will overwhelm him with incredibly superior numbers. We'll just swamp him. We will just fall on him with massive numbers and destroy him, his army, and bring this thing to a sudden and quick end. Ahithophel says a surgical strike. And now Hushai says, no, let's fall on him with a monstrous amount of men and just overwhelm him. A blanketing mass attack, I guess, is the word that I would use for that. And Hushai is being very effective here because David recognizes that the greatest danger is Ahithophel. Because Ahithophel is an elder. He's an older man. He's been with David for years. And he as being part of David's inner circle, understands how David's really thinking. And his advice was the best advice here. Let's get him now. There'll be less death, less people killed. We just killed David and we're done. And Hushai offers the comfort of a blanketing mass attack. You know, and it's funny, if you have an overwhelming an overwhelming advantage in terms of numbers on a battlefield, then it doesn't take much of a general. You just take your 100,000 soldiers and turn them loose on 6,000 soldiers and stand back and watch the massacre. There's an incredible difference in how you are a general or a battle strategist when you're dealing with a smaller number army, like was offered, to go do the surgical strike. And it takes some leadership to deal with a smaller army. Doesn't mean it can't be less effective. But Ahithophel's plan would require effective generalship and battle strategist. Hushai says, look, just bring in a bazillion soldiers and swamp them. It doesn't take much leadership. And it's also a pretty showy way of dealing with this issue. And he's telling Absalom, and you lead it. So you can see Absalom picturing himself at the front of this huge army, dispatching the former king, solidifying his throne and his rule. Whew. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than that of Ahithophel. Because they remember David's ability in the battlefield. For the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom, because that's what's going to happen. Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, Ahithophel has advised Absalom and the leaders of Israel to do this, such and such, but I've advised them to do so and so. Now send a message at once and tell David, do not spend the night at the fords in the wilderness. Cross over without fail, or the king and all the people with him will be swallowed up. So Hushai isn't sure yet which way that Absalom is necessarily going to go. I mean, they said before that the advice of Hushai is better than that of Ahithophel, but there's still a chance that David could be caught. So he wants David to get away. Get across the Jordan. Don't wait. So Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En-Rogel. A female servant was to go and inform them, and they were to go and tell King David, for they couldn't risk being seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So the two of them left at once and went to the house of a man in Bahurim. He had a well in his courtyard, and they climbed down into it. His wife took a covering and spread it out over the opening of the well and scattered grain over it. No one knew anything about it. When Absalom's men came to the woman at the house, they asked him, "Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan?" The woman answered them, "They crossed over the brook." The men searched, but found no one, so they returned to Jerusalem. After they'd gone, the two climbed out of the well and went to inform King David. They said to him, "Set out and cross the river at once. Ahithophel has advised such and such against you." So David and all the people with him set out and crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, no one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and set out for his house in his hometown. He put his house in order, then he hanged himself. So he died and was buried in his father's tomb. Now, this isn't just someone having a pity party and saying, the king's not following my advice, I'm going to go hang myself. No, there's more to it than that. Ahithophel had plainly showed his hand. David knew now that Bathsheba's grandfather was his enemy, and that Bathsheba's grandfather wanted to kill him. In fact, if you take a really close look up here at the wording when Ahithophel was giving his advice. Let's get up here. Look at the pronoun used here. Ahithophel said to Absalom, "I would choose 12,000 men. I would attack him while he's weary and weak. I would strike him with terror. I would strike down the king." Ahithophel had it in for David. There was no doubt. There would be no reconciliation with Ahithophel. If David made it back from this, Ahithophel was going to be dead anyway. And so he took his own life, rather because he could see that Hushai's advice was going to result in the failure of Absalom. Absalom could talk the talk, but he was not a warrior king. He no more deserved the title of warrior king than I could jump over the moon. So, what did David do? Well, David went to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Absalom had appointed Amasa over the army in the place of Jacob. Amasa was the son of Jether, an Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash. All this stuff gets confusing, I know, but this is related, believe it or not. And sister of Zerah, the mother of Joab. The Israelites and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. Now, Amasa was David's nephew. All right, he was the new general over the army of Absalom, and he was David's nephew. So David had a couple of his former counselors in Absalom's employ, and one of those counselors, Hushai, was still an agent of David. And now the main general for Absalom is Amasa, who is a nephew of David. Therefore, that makes him a cousin of Absalom. Absalom, again, nepotism, being at the forefront of things, it appears, appoints his cousin to be the head general. But this cousin is also the nephew of David. And we're going to find out in the next chapter or two, this plays an important part in things. So, Amasa was David's nephew. This would make Amasa a cousin of Absalom and Joab. Absalom appoints Amasa to replace Joab as commander of the army because Joab has moved on with David. Joab is still with David. So when David came to Mahanaim, Shobi, son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites. All right, another thing here. Shobi, son of Nahash. He's the grandson of Hanan. And Hanan was the Ammonite who was unfriendly towards David. All right, Ammonites had helped David's family when David was on the run from Saul. But then Hanan became king, and he treated David very poorly. Well, Shobi apparently was not of the same opinion. And he and Machir, son of Ammiel from Lo-debar, and Barzillai the Gileadite from Jerusalem brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. They also brought wheat and barley, flour and roasted grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds, sheep and cheese from cow's milk for David and his people to eat, for they said the people have become exhausted. So David, his entourage, and his army have been running without regards to food or water, and they need some downtime. They need to rest because the battle is looming. Now, it's also interesting that up here it says Machir, son of Ammiel from Lo-debar. He was Mephibosheth's patron before David brought Mephibosheth into the palace. Knowing full well that the rigors of the desert fight have caused David and his party to become tired, they're hungry, they're thirsty, these allies gave him the rest and provisions they need. Refreshed, David and his troops will engage Absalom and his army. The battle will be joined in Transjordan, and the outcome there will determine which of the two men will rule over all Israel. The flight is over. David has been given food and water and refreshment. His troops are rested. And though vastly outnumbered, David is going to stand and fight. It comes time. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to see an incredible reason why Absalom could never be king. We're going to see an excellent example of this wise old man David, and he was getting old by this time. He's getting long in the tooth. Why he is still the best choice for king for Israel. Absalom is about to show why he is unqualified. This is what I'm learning from Absalom. There is danger when our overestimation of our abilities and our underestimation of our inadequacies takes us into waters we should not be swimming in. Absalom totally overestimated his ability to be a king. Totally underestimated his ability to be a king. And that is what's going to end up getting him defeated. All right, so until the next time, here's my coffee. I'm Paige, and I'm out of here. Have a great day. Bye-bye.